about to tell you exactly why Heisman voters will most likely not be voting Jayden Daniels to win the Heisman this year. I'm in no way saying that Jayden Daniels is not deserving of the Heisman Trophy. He 100% is. I'm seeing the season that he's having. It's impressive. It's special. You can't deny those things whatsoever. I mean, you look at the night he just had against Florida, and you sit there and say, hey, he's out here doing it. But when it comes to Heisman voters, there's a lot of other factors that go into play sometimes. Truly, Jayden Daniels put up video game numbers yesterday. 5 total touchdowns, 372 passing yards, 234 rushing yards. He sets a record in terms of being able to pass over 350 plus yards and rush for over 200 yards in a single game. You cannot overlook that. I agree with you. And I understand that the Heisman Trophy for a lot of people, as what it is supposed to be, it is supposed to be given to the best player in college football. And I understand that Jayden Daniels is very much the most electrifying, most consistent college football player that we are seeing right now. He's in that conversation absolutely as just flat out special to watch and fun to watch. He makes plays on the field. He extends his legs. He extends the plays. He could throw the ball and he could run the ball. It's undeniable. The problem with all of this is, and I know a lot of people don't want to accept it, is that there are 3 losses in that column. I know, I understand. It should be given to the best player in college football and not necessarily the best player on the best team. But that is in the conversation. Looking at Heisman voting, yes, you see nights like this that Jayden Daniels had. But then if you're the Heisman voters, you start to ask yourself, okay, how did these 3 losses come about? We can all be honest and say that those 3 losses can be surmounted up because of LSU's defense. It's not the best defense. We could say that. We could say, well, he's not the reason they lost those 3 games. The defense was. But the Heisman voters are also like, okay, they lost against Florida State, who is also still undefeated. That's a knock. They're not in conference, but that's a knock. Okay, they lost against Ole Miss as well, who is in their conference. All right, interesting. Then you look at Alabama, and I have said this for a few weeks before the game. If Jayden Daniels would have put on a star-studded show against Alabama in Tuscaloosa and would have won that game, the minute he would have got on the plane to leave Tuscaloosa and go back to Baton Rouge, the Heisman would have been on the plane with him. I 100% believe that. If he would have won that game, and of course the game ended early for him because he ended up getting hurt, but if he would have won that game and did what he does, the Heisman would have been in the plane. Conversation over. The problem is that didn't happen like that. So for the voters, it's like we can't go off of shoulda, coulda, woulda. We only could go off what we're seeing, which is that there are still 3 losses in your column, and we just can't ignore that there are other players right now in the Heisman conversation that are undefeated or have 1 loss that have pretty good stats as well. I also understand in the conversation, everyone's bringing up, hey, well, there's other Heisman winners who have had 3 losses. Absolutely. They have Tim Tebow, RG3, and Lamar Jackson. With these 3, though, there are certain asterisks, anomalies that you also have to include when you're trying to say, well, hey, there's other Heisman winners who had 3 losses. I'm going to use Lamar Jackson as the best example for this. The Heisman season Lamar Jackson had was so special that they had to throw out the 3 losses when it came to voting. Literally. When you have over at least 21 rushing touchdowns and at least over 30 passing touchdowns, you're accounting for 51 touchdowns in 2 different categories as a quarterback. Not to mention he had 1,538 rushing yards as a quarterback, the most by a Heisman winning quarterback. Those are stats that you cannot deny, and you have to throw out the losses. For those who might not believe me, go on the Heisman website and look up the stats. They are there. Like, you can't deny that he was flat out the best player in college football despite those 3 losses. But that's what I say, anomaly. You have to put an asterisk at that. That brings me to Jayden Daniels' stats. 30 passing touchdowns, which is amazing, but he also only has 8 rushing touchdowns. So take into consideration what I just said about Lamar Jackson, who had 3 losses and won the Heisman. At least 21 rushing touchdowns and at least 30 passing touchdowns with over 1,538 rushing yards. Jayden Daniels only has 918 rushing yards. That's not me saying that's not great, but when you're using this system of how to compare the 2, it's still a big drop off in terms of how Lamar Jackson got that Heisman with 3 losses and why the conversation may be different with Jayden Daniels with his 3 losses. I'm going to keep saying it. I am in no way saying that what Jayden Daniels is doing this season is not great. It is. He should 100% be a Heisman finalist. He should be in New York City come December to be able to be voted on for this award. I 100% believe he is making it very difficult for Heisman voters right now because they do have to look at the numbers that he's doing. The problem that all comes into this is he's going up against other guys in this category who also have great stats, but also have very winning records. And that is hard if you're a Heisman voter having to decipher, man, should I really give it to this guy that has 3 losses, but he has great stats? But the category of quarterback is how you lead your team. And with college football playoff, a lot of these voters, in a sense, I wouldn't say are jaded by it, but they are looking at it like, hey, he's the quarterback, he's the leader. Wins and losses kind of fall on him. Where is his team ranking right now? That's what they're also looking at. And I know a lot of people don't want to admit that. And hear me when I say this. You don't have to down another player in college football to be able to elevate the player that you believe should be the Heisman Trophy winner. I believe Jayden Daniels is flat out spectacular this season. I also believe that Penix Jr. is flat out spectacular this season. I think a lot of Heisman voters are leaning towards more Penix Jr. than Jayden Daniels in terms of front runner. I think because, yes, his team is also undefeated, but he's had 2 Heisman moments, I believe. The biggest one came against Oregon, facing off against Bo Nix, who others believe is a Heisman front runner. And after a disastrous drive that they had prior, comes out and under 3 plays, gets the touchdown for his team, and they win. That was a big Heisman moment for him. I believe when they played USC, him going against Caleb Williams, who was the Heisman Trophy winner last year, and them winning, and him throwing a dot to the end zone. I believe that those are Heisman moments he's had. I am not saying that Jayden Daniels hasn't had Heisman moments, but again, I say the same thing I said a few weeks ago. If he would have went out and beat Alabama, they would have said that was his Heisman moment. That was special. The numbers back it up. Let's give it to him. But right now, I do believe that they are in favor of Penix Jr. And also, Heisman voting is kind of subjective. It's what you categorize as the best college football player, but also how you view quarterbacks. Jayden Daniels is a dual threat quarterback. He likes to use his legs a lot. In some arguments, people are like, well, Penix Jr. doesn't have as many rushing touchdowns as Jayden Daniels, and Bo Nix doesn't have as many as Jayden Daniels. The problem with that is those are 2 different styles of being a quarterback. Penix Jr. is not this run-first quarterback. He is a pocket-passing quarterback who can run when needed. Some can be said about Bo Nix as well in that Oregon offense. But if we're talking about that too, you have to also add in Marvin Harrison Jr. for Ohio State, who is the best wide receiver in college football and just had a 3-touchdown night, literally. So it's hard. But I do think for Heisman voters, they're not really leaning towards giving Jayden Daniels this trophy just because of the night he had against Florida. And this all can factor into how the season pans out. There's about 2 games left. So if Washington ends up with the loss, the conversation could be different. Ohio State ends up with the loss. Maybe Marvin Harrison Jr. might not be in the conversation for a lot of people. Michigan gets a loss. J.J. McCarthy is not in the conversation. Bo Nix, to me, is in the most comfortable position because he already had a loss. But for Heisman voters, it's like, well, if Penix stays undefeated and he beats you, he should kind of get the Heisman. It's all crazy with how these voters might look at it this year. The Heisman voting, this is not going to be some landslide victory for any of these players. This is going to be very close in Heisman voting, I believe, because they're making it hard. I do believe finalists will be Penix Jr., Jayden Daniels, Bo Nix, and that 4th spot could possibly be Marvin Harrison Jr. or J.J. McCarthy. There's a lot of football left to be played. Things could change. Some teams get some losses. The Heisman voters will be looking like, I don't know anymore. But as of right now, you can't deny what Jayden Daniels is doing. He's making it hard for the voters. I promise you that. But there are going to be so many other factors in how these campaigns for these players end up being in the last couple of weeks of college football regular season. But Jayden Daniels is making it hard. These Heisman voters, I'm telling you, this is not going to be an easy Heisman race at all. But whoever gets the trophy, I do believe will be deserving.